Michael Crichton is here. He is the author of 12 best-selling novels, including The Andromeda Strain, Jurassic Park, Sphere, and Rising Sun, and others. His books have been translated into 30 languages and have sold more than 20 million copies over the years. He's also penned 8 screenplays and was a creator of the NBC television show ER. His new book is called Pray. I am pleased to have him back at this table again. Welcome back.
Thanks, Charlie.
Great to have you here. This has been one hell of a year for you.
It has.
It has. Because people want to know about it, just to make sure. First of all, on September 11th, you were boarding a plane.
I was.
At Kennedy.
Right.
Heading for Los
8 o'clock in the morning, yes.
And so now that you look back on that, what thoughts does that?
Well, you know, it didn't, we were put down in Indianapolis, and I then was making my way across the country. It was about 48 hours later before I started to shake, you know, and to realize that probably there are a lot of other 8 a.m. flights to Los Angeles that it could have been any number of them.
Did you then also begin to read a lot about some of the conflicts that exist within the realm of terrorism and our relationship and all that kind of thing? Because I thought I read somewhere that you had become more hawkish because of this experience.
No, it wasn't actually that. It was another one.
Was it the time that someone broke into your house in Santa Monica and tied you up and
put a gun to my head?
Put a gun to your head.
Right. And what was interesting to me was that I was watching the Sunday news shows the following week and realized that, I mean, they were going on as they always had, and I realized that I had moved on the question of Iraq without even thinking about it, because I was now understanding that there are some things that are the way they are, whether you like them or not, and actually talking isn't going to make a difference. There are things in that category. And, you know, I think, certainly in my case, I think in the situation of a lot of people who are on TV giving their opinions, they can really arrange their lives and their worlds to be the way they want them to be.
Yeah.
And to have something come in very forcefully and be absolutely not in your control, phenomenally dangerous, and you must deal with it right then and on someone else's terms is not a typical experience.
Let me turn to this book. The question always comes up about you is how does an idea morph into a book? I know, have multiple interests. We've talked about many of them on this program.
Yes, we have.
Some have not been made into books yet, but might be,
That's right.
Freud being one.
Yes, still waiting for him.
I'm sure that's going to be a book at some point, the whole notion of psychoanalysis. How did this get started for you, this idea of Pray?
You know, I gave a lecture to the American Association for the Advancement of Science a few years ago, and the topic was images of science and of scientists in the media. So in the course of that, you're reviewing different ideas, and there really are 2 core sort of mythic images and stories. One is Faust, and the other is Frankenstein.
Right.
And Frankenstein, if anyone is asked to visualize it, what they think of is Boris Karloff staggering around with bolts in his neck. Right. And it occurred to me that that image is 80 years old. And that's an eternity in science. And that if there were an escaped monster, if there were a demonstration of scientific power gone wrong, that it would not have that shape at all. I mean, it's very much, really almost a 19th century shape. And that it would look like something, the monster of today would look very different. And I started thinking, well, what would it look like?
And how did you find out what it would look like? I mean, how did you end up with the kind of monster that you have?
Well, there's
also a reading list in here in case you don't know.
Right,
and there's also an introduction about the subject as well. So you help us there by
there is a growing interest. I don't know how long ago somebody at the JPL mentioned to me that the era of making these enormously expensive...
JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Caltech.
Right, thank you. These hugely expensive space probes in which you sent one out and hoped for the best, and then something might go wrong. Those days were over. They were going to start making fleets of these things and to send them out as sort of little swarms, and if something happened to one or another of them, that was okay. And that is really sort of the initiation of a whole notion of, or at least in my knowledge, of using biological metaphors for mechanical devices. And they start talking about self-repairing machines. And then pretty soon they talk about self-reproducing machines. And then they start talking about emergent behavior from populations of machines. And having really rather small and rather stupid entities, sort of like termites, are small and stupid, and yet they can build huge termite mounds. Having small little things and having the behavior emerge from the group, populations.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. There's some people at MIT doing work on both artificial intelligence and artificial life. They're doing, as you know, I'm sure you know more about this than I knew from the get-go. But they have decided to sort of start from ants and the lowest species and work up as their model,
That's right,
rather than
top down.
top down.
Right. Top down, I think most people would agree, doesn't work now.
Yeah. So you got to work. You figure out what they can do, and what is the minimum scale you can get this down to try to figure out how to build something, right?
Yes, and also,
and what characteristics do they have?
well, and you know, eventually they can soon have more characteristics than a termite. I mean, they talk about making computer programs with virtual agents, and the virtual agents can interact. Some can have goals, and others can be, you know, assisting the goals, and they can change their minds. And I mean, they can be quite sophisticated in a certain way, and yet the behavior of the program as a whole is the sum of all these behaviors. And so the programmers are programming the bottom level, and the behavior of the total program is something that's not programmed.
Now, here's what's interesting about Prey. You not only you have a great idea, first of all, but this is not the first scientific idea that you've had that can be made into an ongoing page-turning novel. You also have here this very interesting story of a husband and wife in which the husband has been fired and he's at home.
Right.
He's a house husband. Right. She's dynamic and driven, and she works for this sort of the controversial company, right?
Right.
Now, when did that come into being? After you decided on the science, or before? And how does it mix into this? Don't know.
Probably about 5 years ago, I had this isolated image. It was the image of a very well-dressed businesswoman coming home from the office late at night and going into a nursery and slapping her kids.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. And I would think, oh, that's kind of odd. What's that about? And it would go away, and 6 months later it would be back, and then it would go away again. And this has been several years. And finally it began to come to me repeatedly to the point it was a kind of a visual obsession. And I began to think, well, you know, why am I thinking about this? What's it about? And I began to see that I could do this story that interested me in a domestic context and have it begin that way.
And she works at the company where bad things are about to happen.
Right.
And he happens to be an expert in one aspect
Right.
of the problems that are about to erupt. So we have a story.
Yes, we do.
We have two characters already.
Yeah.
And we have a story. And we have a location.
Right.
He's got to go somewhere in the desert to see what's going on.
Yes.
So we're off and running here.
We are.
Now, what's hardest about this so far? Putting this book to paper. Putting this story to paper.
The most difficult thing was that because we're talking in a very rational way.
Yeah, right.
What I had in mind to do
Well, I
for
hope
this,
so.
yeah. But what I had in mind was to try not to figure it all out too carefully.
Yeah.
So I would get to certain points, and I would think, well, what's going to happen now? For example, the wife is a phenomenally important character, and everything is about the interaction of the husband and the wife.
Right.
He goes off to the desert. She's not there.
Right.
And it stopped me cold. I thought, what do I do now? Right. She's not here.
Yeah.
She should be. I better get her back pretty soon. But in the meantime, what's my second act? You know?
Yeah. The science you have locked before. You have come to grips with the science. But then you have a difficult problem, it would seem to me, which you got to figure out, how can I make this so that scientists are not going to think I'm silly? And real people, ordinary people, who don't have the luxury of your time to study, can comprehend it. Is that easy or difficult?
It's difficult.
That's a real mountain for you to climb.
It is. It's a lot of rewriting is what it amounts to.
That's what it is?
Yeah.
You get to the end of the story and then go back and rewrite, or you rewrite chapter by chapter?
No, the sections, I'm mostly talking about the sections that are didactic, or that are trying to explain the science. And the issue is really to try and do it very quickly, to space it out so that you're not giving a huge lump, but you're the plot is sort of calling for a little explanation here and then a little explanation here, and to do it clearly without being completely incorrect. It's delicate.
Why is it you're so fascinated with science? I mean, we all know you went to medical school, and we all know that while you were in medical school, you started writing novels under pseudonyms and helped pay your way. And we all know that Jonas Salk said to you, you're a better writer than doctor.
Yeah.
Right?
True words. And he said no. Yeah.
So what is it about science for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's something that's very easy for me. And it seems to me that an enormous amount of what constitutes social change in my lifetime has been a function of scientific development. So the technologies that we're experiencing, which are enormously different from what they were 20, 40, 50 years ago, are what's driving a lot of the change in the society. And increasingly, I think, if you don't understand the science, you're not going to be able to really make informed decisions. And arguably, in the past, some people would say we have made very informed decisions.
You have basically said also that the only time that science has been stopped was with the supersonic transport.
Yes.
That's the only time people said it's too much environmental damage and too much noise, and it's not worth the cost.
And too expensive.
And too expensive.
And who wants it anyway?
No other time. Now, there are a lot of people in Congress and everywhere else saying, we know how to clone, but we ought not go down that direction, Where are you worried about science?
I'm quite worried about the whole area of self-reproducing technologies, which is already biotechnology. Yeah, right. And that's part of why I did this, was to try and make an example of what might be in our future. But we don't really need to worry about nanotechnology right now and self-reproducing
20,
machines.
30 years off.
Maybe 10, but not today.
Here's what you have said also. Atomic bombs are terrible weapons, but genetic engineering can do far more damage than nuclear bombs. That's a powerful statement. And what do you mean by genetic engineering in that context?
I'm not sure is one answer.
Well,
I think I'm talking.
You said it.
Well, please. I think
you can say things you're not sure about.
Right.
That's your point.
That's right. Yes, it's terrible to have your past brought back to you.
Well, this wasn't a long time ago.
No.
It was not a long time ago.
That makes it worse. For example, I mean, just to take at the height of all the Cold War and all the issues about nuclear exchanges, nobody seriously thought. I mean, in the days of Herman Kahn, or, the Dr. Strangelove imagery, no one thought that a nuclear exchange would end life on the planet. But conceivably, if there were some kind of a virus that interfered with photosynthesis in enough plants,
which is the essential component to life.
Right. Everything's gone. The biosphere is essentially wiped out.
And it's possible.
Different kind of power.
And it's possible.
Oh, I don't know. I hope it's not possible. But there certainly are coming to be some examples in which things that were imagined to be very, very difficult in genetic technology are being discovered to be not necessarily so difficult. Bad things.
So back to my question. What's necessary for a civilized world to make sure that it makes wise decisions about science?
Okay. I have a weird answer, which is, why don't we all walk around naked? And it isn't really because there's a law about it or there's a regulation. We don't do it for lots of reasons, and we're trained not to do it. And there's all kinds of social pressures not to do it. And I think one important thing is the education of scientists themselves, in terms of having an intuition and an idea about what not to do. I mean, a very important change in my lifetime is I have heard scientists say, we were looking at this line of research and we decided not to follow it. It's too dangerous.
What example is that? Give me an example.
I can't.
But you've heard him say it. Your point is you've heard him say it.
No, I mean, I know what it is, but there's no point in saying that.
Oh, you know what it is, but you're not going to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, it's something extremely toxic. So,
Wait. Okay, just let me understand a moment. I'm going to let you go by. It's okay for you not to tell me because in your own judgment you want to censor yourself. But you're not going to tell us because you don't want us to get alarmed by it or because it's up to the scientists to debate this and come up with some idea, and there's no sense in doing it on mass media.
I mean, yes. I mean, here's a group of people who have decided not to follow this path, not to take these risks, and why should I be shooting my mouth off about it?
Will you tell me after the program?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I mean, I want to know. This is something that could be so dangerous that they don't even want to go there.
Right. And it's also something about the balance of, how likely it is to produce something beneficial.
Okay, here's my point.
Okay.
There's always somebody that will go there.
But, you see, this is interesting. That's right. And the classic argument always was, I might as well do it because if I don't do it, the next guy will.
Right.
And what's happening now is that there's a new kind of ethic, and scientists are saying, somebody else may do it, but I won't.
Yeah. And if enough say that, we're okay.
Correct.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit like saying, why don't you, rather than going with the majority, why don't you stand for something? If one person stands up unconscious, other people will begin to say, there is power in,
right.
In numbers.
Right. And there are certain things that we ought not to do. At least not now, or at least until we know more.
Because we don't know more.
Right.
The genie could get out of the bottle and then it's too late.
Right. I mean,
most of it's in molecular biology, or is it? Most of it's there.
At the moment, yeah.
That's where the scary stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's the science at work in prey? Nanotechnology. Watch this tape. This is Bill Joy, who wrote an article for Wired magazine, and he alarmed a lot of people. And scientists came out of the woodwork arguing with him, saying that he was an alarmist. He talked about robotics, and he talked about nanotechnology, and he talked about other things. Roll tape. Here it is, what he said on this program.
Well, nanotechnology is the ability to manipulate things at the atomic level. And so in the dreams of people like Eric Drexler, the idea would be that you can build almost anything by assembling it atom by atom. And so you build these little tiny machines, erector sets, kind of little things at the atomic scale that can manufacture anything out of just basically dirt. Now this drive to build these kinds of things has been ongoing for 20 years, the early advocates, and it's still perhaps 20 or 30 years away. But it's an incredibly powerful technology if it can work, and I don't think it can be discounted completely anymore.
How far off is it?
Well, I thought it was quite a ways off 10 years ago when I first heard about it, but last year a friend of mine who's a physicist told me that he thought that molecular electronics, which is an electronic form of nanotechnology, was very, very practical. And there's been some coverage in the press about some work that's been done. For example, Hewlett-Packard and UCLA have done some research in this area. So I think that's probably the first commercializable nanotechnology, and we may see it in the next couple of years. It's the beginning of a new field. So I don't think it's any longer sane to discount perhaps massive investment in this technology, because it's way better than, say, silicon technology.
Give me some sense of what happens here in terms of the technology and the science that provides the drive for your novel.
What I tried to address was the limitations that exist, which are considerable in terms of having nanotechnology become a really viable technology. I mean, I think clearly it's on its way. I mean, clearly it's going to be a major 21st century technology in the way that computers and nuclear technology influenced the latest century. But one of the ways to kind of short circuit is to do some of the work of molecular or atomic assembly, to do some of that work with genetic engineering. In other words, people have noticed, at different times, if you want a certain kind of a molecule, well, we have these cells that are just expert at making whatever you want, and that's what we're doing right now. So that would be a way to begin the assembly process, because right at this moment, I don't think anybody's really clear exactly how it would be done. So the story is a kind of a piggybacking of nanotechnology on a biotechnological base, and the fact that it was done this way to save time and to make a leapfrog is part of what makes the difficulties when people try and unravel it.
When people say, I'm the 999th person to say this to you and you have a perfect answer. When people say you're more interested in science than character, what do you say?
True.
True.
Yeah. Well, the very first thing that I wrote, the Andromeda Strain, I mean, my model was an oil slick, and we have a very good example right now. And the answer to how to deal with oil slicks is don't let them happen. Once a tanker's broken open, the reality is there's nothing to be done. I mean, people can say there's a plan, there's nothing works. And that's why we see all these pictures of people scrubbing off birds and stuff. Nothing works. So the solution to that problem is don't let it occur. And in the same way, I think the experience of a lot of technological circumstances, scenarios, which is what I'm usually writing, individual personality traits in the way that we ordinarily think of them are not very important. In other words, people are caught in some giant thing that it doesn't matter whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, a fast thinker, an impulsive person. You're trapped in this.
Okay, but let me counterbalance that. I mean, clearly you want to write interesting people. I mean, whether it has nothing to do with their ability to solve the problem, you want to have interesting people in a novel or a movie dealing with the problem. Do we not? Or is the problem so significant and so powerful and so interesting that as it moves along, it doesn't matter how dullard these people are, in your case they're not, but is that the thesis?
Partly. It depends, it depends on which thing we're talking about. But I mean, it's certainly true that when I was doing Jurassic Park, I had to eliminate a lot of interpersonal stuff because you can't have two characters discussing some life issue with a dinosaur outside the window. Everybody's going, shut up, there's a dinosaur there. And that kind of drives everything.
Okay, but I get that. But here you are, Michael. You're I meet most interesting people, a lot of interesting people. You're one of the most interesting people I know, period. You're interested in art because you did a book on Jasper Johns. Mm-hmm. You have a modern art collection. Mm-hmm. You're interested in science, obviously. You're interested in psychology, obviously, because of your fascination with Freud. You're interested in volcanoes. You're interested in relationships. You've been married 4 times. Clearly, so clearly you think you're going to get it right. You've lived on the East Coast, on the West Coast. You lecture. I mean, you're a guy with lots of interest. You are an interesting person. Is it possible that you can, don't you care about creating characters on paper that are as interesting as you are in real life, with passions and relationships and,
Okay. One answer is what I told you about the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
The other answer is that what I really believe is that we have an idea of a mental landscape about our motivations and why we do things, and I don't actually believe any of that stuff. So part of my problem is...
You don't believe in pride and ego and
I do,
failure and all that stuff.
But I don't believe in a sort of Henry Jamesian way. I don't believe that we know why we do what we do.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, J.B.S. Haldane once said, he was a famous mid-20th century biologist, and he said that he had thought everything over and he'd come to the conclusion that he had no idea what motivated him to do anything in his life.
Do you have any idea what motivates you? Tell me.
Not really.
You don't? It just happens?
I think it really does. If you ask somebody, let's say somebody asks you a mathematical, what's 6 times 9? And you go 54, and I say, well, what was the process you went through? The answer is, wait a minute, Charlie, but there is no process. You have it right away, and you don't know how you got it. And I think an enormous amount of thought is actually that way.
I know.
It just arrives. And then we make up a story about how it happened.
Oh, maybe. Now, I think you're wrong on this, actually. But I do know you're right about the brain. I mean, all the people studying the brain are saying, it's a little bit like, I don't say to myself, I want to drink a cup of coffee, so I got to reach out and put my hand here. Just boom,
Right.
Now, that's part of it. There's no motivation here. Just how I do it. That's part of what they're learning about neurons and what neurons do and what different neurons do. And when you show them this stuff is as exciting to me as nanotechnology, if not more. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm surprised you didn't write a book about the brain.
Just wait.
Just wait?
Just wait.
You're fascinated by it as well as I am. This whole idea of artificial intelligence is equally interesting to you.
But you know, the brain issue, and if what I'm talking about has validity, is it now comes down to serious questions of free will. You know, now the experiment that I always like is if you're really observing people, if you touch someone on the shoulder, they will begin to turn toward the touch before the nerve fibers have reached the cerebral cortex. So their brain doesn't know that they've been touched, but they're already moving toward it. And if you then say to them, well, what did you do? They say, whoa, somebody touched me, so I turned. But that's an ex post facto explanation.
So what's the real explanation?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. It must be something unconscious.
Unconscious,
Or it must be almost reflexive.
I have asked scientists, lots of them, some of the best, tell me what interests you the most. A number of them say the unconscious. They're fascinated by it. Others are fascinated by memory, how memory works. You know. But the unconscious is the most frequent answer I get.
Right. I agree, actually.
And is this part of the reason you were so fascinated by Freud, or is that a whole other subject?
No, I was mostly interested in what psychology looks like once you take Freud away, because he's apparently wrong on everything, just about. You know, I mean.
And yet still viewed as one of the great influences of the 20th century.
Yeah, still viewed. Yeah. Still, I mean, I think probably an important intellectual figure, as Marx is an important intellectual figure, or I'm not sure what else, but not because he's right. He's not right. I mean, the basic fundamental. I mean, I think even down to the core structures, id, ego, superego. That's not right. The primacy of early childhood in terms of how you turn out as an adult. That's clearly not right. I mean, we have plenty of studies now that show it's not true.
Have you ever come to grips with your relationship to your father and understanding it?
I think over time that relationship, at least as it exists now, I mean, it's been dead for many years, but has evolved considerably.
I mean, that was 55.
Yeah. It has. I mean, I think that's an important kind of inner dialogue that goes on, and certainly changed when I became a father myself.
Yeah. You understand sort of the scientific explanation for the way the world evolved, universe, correct?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. Big Bang and all that. You can take it to a point where you believe you see a role for a creator. Am I wrong about that or not? In other words, you have looked at this and you understand the science and believe in the science, and yet somewhere out there makes you say, maybe there was a role for a creator.
True. You want to know how I think that?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
So, let's say God's really smart, which he probably is, right? Or she. Okay? What would be the most interesting way to go about making the universe? And I would think the cleverest, neatest, slickest, most sophisticated way would be to start with the minimum number of things and have them change and develop, and so that you start with this little tiny infinitesimal thing and it blows apart, and pretty soon it coalesces into stars and galaxies, and then eventually we have the byproducts of the stars as other heavier elements, and then pretty soon we've got some life forms here and there, and then the life forms go, and then there's some kind of life form that can look back on this and go, how did this happen? But the Creator only had to do this initial act. It's pretty fantastic. Anyway, that's what I think about it.
So therefore, what does religion mean to you?
Religion to me really means ethical systems.
Does it really? Mm-hmm. In the end, it comes down to a sense of values.
It does, yeah.
For you. Yeah. This has already been sold to the movies.
Yes.
To Fox.
Yes.
It's published by HarperCollins.
Yes.
You have a new publisher. It used to be Knopf for you.
Right.
You made a change because?
I thought it was. I thought I was getting lax, and I thought that. I thought both I and my publisher were taking each other for granted a little bit.
And new players might make a difference. Did it make a difference?
Seems to.
Seems to. Different editor, though. I mean, here you come with a different editor after having been edited by Sonny Menta for a long time.
Right.
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 You've sold it to the movies. 2 remaining subjects for you. I have many, but I have time limits. You're developing a game for Sega. Now, why in the world are you doing that?
It interests me.
What interests you?
I don't know. I mean, I do know part of it. I mean, I think in some way that how we define visual entertainment is going to be, in the classic way of movies and television, is going to move aside or shift, and there's going to be more interactive forms of everything, storytelling included. And I'm interested in seeing if I can do something in those areas of developing things.
This is not exactly on point, but it is in part. I just returned from doing a profile for 60 Minutes on Tony Hawk. He's the best skateboarder, as you must know, from California, from Santa Monica. Best skateboarder around, 34 years old. Makes games and everything else.
Games, right.
All of a sudden, I got inside that culture. It is fascinating. It has its style, it has its fashion, it has its personality. It is extraordinary, you know. And you understand how they can translate that into, and how kids how they connect to it. More kids want to skateboard than they want to play baseball now. That's number one. But more often, the more interesting thing is that why is it that games are so attractive to them? One, they can do it by themselves, I think. Number two, it's fast moving. They like that. And on and on and on. It is fascinating to me, too. Michael Crichton, I could talk to forever. This book is called Prey. Here's what they say. I don't care how much enthusiastic the reviewer was, or how the reviewer had some criticism, one or the other might have had, some problem with one point or another. They always say one central thing, which is why Michael has sold a gazillion copies of all these books and made a gazillion dollars. It is that the reviewer could not turn it down, could not put the book down. They all describe it as I love it and therefore recommend it, or B, I love it but I have these restraints, but I couldn't put it down. In the end, he understands that. He understands storytelling, and he understands the fascination of things we don't know about more than anybody that I know. I'm always pleased to have him on the show, and I thank you for coming.
Thanks, Charlie.